Initially, when I thought about this episode, I had intended for it to be more informational and a resource for how to find a medium yourself. But it ended up being more of a personal testimony from my experience with mediums. But I have made sure to leave below in the show notes links to the organizations that I mentioned, link to the medium that I used, as well as a couple books I recommend that were helpful for me in researching and learning more about mediums, their process, and what to expect. And as always, if you have any questions, you can contact me at my email address listed below or on Instagram. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Selfish Griever podcast. I'm the host, Whitney Semirano. This is a podcast for grieving parents looking for spiritual support on their grief journey as they find their purpose after loss. We're a community for grievers discussing all aspects of the grief journey, connecting with your deceased child, and spirituality. I've been a grieving mom since June 2020 when my firstborn twin son, Orion, died in an accident when he was 2 years old. Here on this podcast, you'll hear interviews with grievers on similar paths and experts in spirituality. Welcome to the Selfish Griever community. Welcome back to the Selfish Griever podcast. Today I want to talk about mediums and mediumship appointments. For some reason, this is a topic that is really polarizing for people. It's the number one thing that I get the most negative feedback on whenever I post about it. And I don't really understand why it's a concept that seems to be so threatening for some people. And to be clear, this episode is not about convincing you that mediumship is real, because I don't think that's my job. The purpose of this episode is more so to talk about my personal experiences with mediumship, why I decided that I wanted to use a medium, just to shed some light on a topic that maybe you're interested in knowing more about or you've been considering, but have been hesitant because it seems shrouded in mystery or such an unusual thing that you've maybe never considered before. I've talked to a lot of parents who've used mediums, and all of them agree that it's a pretty standard reaction after your child passes away to want to be able to find a way to communicate with them again. And depending on the circumstances of your child's death, it might be for closure, or it might be for confirmation that they really are in a better place, that they're okay. And then I think it evolves, because after you do it the first time, then mediumship becomes a way that you can keep checking in with them. It's interesting though, because mediumship is definitely a two-way phone call, so to speak. And the spirits on the other side are the ones who get to decide whether or not they want to pick up the call. And so sometimes that means that you hear from spirit, really past family members that you didn't expect to hear from. And other times it means that maybe a spirit you really desperately wanted to connect with doesn't come through. And sometimes we don't get to know immediately why that is. But I do think it's important to be aware that it's not something you can control. It's not something the medium can control either. And speaking of what mediums can control, I think I've gotten a little ahead of myself, because where this conversation really should start is, how do you find a medium that you want to speak to? For me, I first found what I would call a reputable organization talking about mediumship in the Forever Family Foundation. I don't remember now how I first came across them. I think I was probably just Googling mediums, maybe mediums for bereaved parents, because the Forever Family Foundation was started by two parents, Bob and Fran Ginsberg. And I remember when I found the website, I of course read everything that I could, and I found out that in 2002, Bob and Fran had gone to dinner with their two children, who were 19 and 15 at the time. And they drove separately, and after they left dinner, their son, who'd been driving their daughter, got in a car accident, and their daughter Bailey passed away as a result. And they said that when they went to grief support groups, they felt like any time that they tried to broach the subject of where was Bailey now, that they would get shut down. And that wasn't sufficient for them. So they started their own organization in an effort to help support grieving parents who were looking for ways to connect with their deceased children. And from that grew a process to certify mediums. And I don't remember all the specific details, but I do recall that they are based out of New York, and they ended up working with a university out of Arizona to develop a scientific-based system that evaluated the medium's capabilities for multiple sitters in multiple blind situations. Because Bob and Fran found that there really was no standardized process in place to verify a medium's capabilities. And that made for a dangerous environment because it's hard to determine when you're looking for a medium if they're authentic or not. And that idea intrigued me because I am so logical and I was so worried about being taken advantage of. So this process where they would have mediums that would volunteer to be certified, and the certification was free for the mediums. And if they passed with a satisfactory rating, then the Forever Family Foundation would list them as a certified medium on the website. An important part of this was that mediums cannot pay to be listed on the website. And so this became my first resource for locating a medium. And they have a list of about 25 of them on their website that are certified. And I remember clicking through and looking all over and trying to decide who I wanted to test it out with. And I ended up using a medium named Catherine Nadal, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, out of New York. And I remember that I chose her because she did a 15-minute psychic appointment for a really low price. I think it was about $30. That was a donation to a veteran that she knows who's disabled and discharged out of the military now. And so my logical thought process was, okay, this is a good test opportunity, not of her, but for me to decide if this was something that even felt right at a low investment point, and that worst case scenario, if it wasn't at all for me, then at least $30 went to a veteran. And she's very clear in her appointments that a 15-minute psychic session is not a mediumship appointment. I did not go to this appointment expecting that I was going to connect with Orion. I mostly just wanted to see if it was going to feel real to me. And she's based out of New York, and we did it over a phone call. I don't think she even had my last name, but even if she did, I'm not a social media person, really. I wasn't worried about if she, Googled me. I like that people get so worried about if mediums can, have found out this information on the internet that they tell you. And maybe they could, but that'd be a lot of effort to invest in Googling me and trying to research information just for a 15-minute appointment. And I thought about putting a clip from my mediumship appointment with her on this call, but when I listened back through, because I recorded the session, as you should with any medium that you talk to, because there's always going to be information that comes through that you're going to want to be able to listen back on later. And so as I listened back through on the recording, I just didn't hear any quick sound bites that I thought were going to be helpful for the audience, because they're out of context and there's not enough time to put the whole recording on here. But I can tell you that even now, listening back, the stuff that she was talking about surprised me, because some of it was in some ways so innocuous, and yet at the same time was definitely something important to me. Like, an example I can give is I had my appointment with her about 3 days before I cut off all my hair and donated it. And I always had long hair and was raised having long hair. That was just, part of my identity. Something that was a vanity metric that was highly valued. And after Orion died, and I just felt like I wanted to find a way to physically represent how different I felt on the inside, I decided to cut 10 inches of my hair and donate it. And in the past, a decision like this would have involved me talking about it and telling maybe my sister or my mom or a close friend or two. But I didn't tell anybody about this. Not because I was hiding it, but I just wasn't interested in anybody's opinion. And believe it or not, that's something that Kat brought up in the psychic appointment, which, like I said, so innocuous, right? Who cares? You're getting a haircut. But at the same time, she mentioned in the appointment that this was something that was a big deal to me, that wouldn't have been something I would have considered before. And she talked about what a different person I was now than I had been just a couple years prior. Keeping in mind, she didn't know me. She didn't know anything about me or the fact that my son had just passed away a few months prior. And then towards the end of the appointment, she did start to bring up kids. And she picked up that I had 2 boys. And she talked about that they had differences. And by the end, she had discerned that one of them was deceased. And she started to describe to me how Orion looked. And it still wasn't a mediumship appointment. I didn't receive any messages, but that was the moment that clinched it for me. I was definitely going to have a full-on mediumship appointment at some point. And even though I did have a successful sitting with Catherine, I didn't feel this connection with her. And I think that's something important to recognize, because there is something to be said for how you relate to the medium that you decide to use. It's kind of like when you're meeting strangers and there's some people you immediately connect with and other people that you don't. And that doesn't mean that the people you don't connect with are bad people or something's wrong with them. It's just something about a vibe, right? And that vibe is actually your energy. conversing back and forth your energy with that other person. And even remotely over a phone or over a Zoom call, you can sense that. I'm pretty certain everybody here knows what I'm talking about. And that is something vital to a truly successful mediumship appointment. And so I was convinced that I was going to do an appointment at some point, but I was still searching for who I was going to use. And I wish I remembered more details about how I found the medium I did work with, but anybody who's a griever knows that the fog over your brain, grief memory, whatever they call it, is a real thing. That's actually why I'm so grateful that I journaled so often, because there are a lot of things I can't remember. But at any rate, I ended up finding another medium through Instagram. I don't know if that's how I found her actually, but I do know that I followed her on Instagram for quite a while. And she had this personality that I liked. And believe it or not, she's on Yelp. So she has hundreds of reviews. And at the time, she did a podcast with her sister talking about what it's like to be a medium. Her sister's not a medium. And so the premise of the show was kind of about that they both had similar childhoods and experienced some spiritual stuff as kids. And how her sister, I guess, relates to her job as a medium now and understands it. And that was just something I needed to hear at that time, because it helped me reconcile that I didn't have to understand crystal energy or sound healing or any of the other things that at that point seemed very woo-woo to me in order to believe in mediums or in order to benefit. It just kind of made everything seem more normal. And that endeared her to me, I guess. So I finally got the courage in October of 2020 to contact her to book an appointment. And she's popular and pricey. So the appointment was booked 3 months out. Yeah, that's right. I booked at the end of October, and my appointment ended up being around January 20th, I think, of 2021. And in the interim, the absolute unexpected happened, and both my paternal grandparents passed away. It happened after Christmas, right around New Year's, so just a couple weeks before that appointment. And at that point, I had like an estranged relationship with my grandfather, mostly because I was just so deep in my grief that I couldn't give anything to, a relationship with him at that point. And my grandmother had severe Alzheimer's and had for quite a few years, so she didn't recognize any of us anymore. And I remember right after my grandfather passed away. Well, first, I should tell you guys I had this maybe not weird, but definitely unusual reaction of intense envy. And I was pretty furious too. It's weird because I wasn't furious that they passed away unexpectedly. I was furious that they got to be on the other side with my son. And I wanted that to be me. And not in a suicidal way, just in I missed Orion. And so it felt incredibly unfair that they got to be with him now and I still had to be here. And I remember immediately after my grandfather passed away, telling him audibly, out loud, that I did not want to see him at my mediumship appointment, that I was not coming to talk to him, I was coming to talk to my son, and he better not show up. And some mediums will tell you that there's, I guess, this rest period that you need as a soul from the time that you pass away to when you can first start connecting to mediums. I will say that the medium I went to, I heard her repeatedly say that that was not her experience. And so I didn't take any comfort in the fact that maybe it was going to be too soon for my grandpa to show up, because he was a forceful personality in life, and I just was convinced that that was how he would be in the afterlife as well. And I was so nervous when I went to the mediumship appointment, which was over Zoom. I scheduled it for a time when I was home alone. I set myself up in like a comfortable spot on my couch with the computer sitting on like the arm basically of the couch next to me. That sounds like a weird feeling to have, because I'm not the one who has to do anything. I just have to be present. But I was super nervous. I think you just want it to be everything that you're hoping for. And at the same time, you don't really know what to hope for because you've never been. But I remember she got started, and literally the first person through was my grandfather. And I did not tell the medium that I didn't want to hear from him, or that he was not the person that I was there for, or that I warned him repeatedly not to show up. And she said that he was there with my son, and she tried to explain to me that he was telling her he was a different person now on the other side than he had been here. And then he was with my son, and they were dancing and happy. And you can say that, what medium wouldn't tell you that they're happy together on the other side? But this medium is an evidential medium, which from what I've read seems like a standard practice. And if it's not standard, then it's definitely the preferred practice that you should be considering when you're looking around at mediums. And what it basically means is that their objective when they start the appointment is to bring through information from spirit that would be something only you would know, or only your close network would know, something that is meaningful specifically to you as proof that they really are speaking to the spirit on the other side. And obviously it's the spirit who provides this proof. And in my situation, the proof that came through was that my grandfather called my dad by his childhood moniker. That nobody calls my dad by that name anymore. And I really only ever heard my grandmother call him that, which she didn't ever come through in the appointment. And that was really disappointing for me, because she was somebody that I was looking forward to speaking to if she did come through. Because with her Alzheimer's, it had been a lot of years since I felt like I'd really gotten to talk to her. And then after my grandfather was through with his piece, then Orion came through. And I remember that she said he didn't want to talk about how he'd passed away because it was traumatizing for me. And I think every grieving parent's traumatized by the passing of their child. But for me at that time, I wasn't sleeping. It'd been 7 months since Orion had died, and I still, every time I closed my eyes, would see him at the bottom of the pool. And so I didn't sleep. I would stay awake until I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. I'd sleep for about 3 hours, and then I'd wake up. They told me I had PTSD, which sounds like such a serious term that should be reserved for soldiers, people in combat. But I guess it was true. So I was reliving that night every day. But I had read that when you pass away, you're greeted by family members who have gone before you. And I'd always wondered about that because all the family members who had gone before Orion had never met him in this life. And without me asking about it, she told me that an angel had met Orion to take him. And part of my trauma was thinking about whether or not Orion had had any panic or fear in his final moments. And she told me that the angel took him before his actual physical passing because his soul didn't need to experience his death in this lifetime. And she also told me that there was divine intervention that night, leading to all the things happening the way that they did. Because if you've listened to my previous episode, then you know that there was a sequence of events that if even just one of them hadn't happened, Orion would probably still be here. And I had been feeling like the odds were just too great for all of those things to be coincidences. And she brought that up in the appointment. I remember that she also talked to me about the guilt that I was feeling and told me that I needed to let that go. That it wasn't my fault. It was supposed to be this way. And so in a weird way, my appointment gave me a lot of closure. They weren't earth-shattering revelations or things that I hadn't already thought about or maybe even heard other people tell me, but they made a big difference when I heard them coming from Orion. 2 other things that I want to mention about the appointment are, one, that my maternal grandmother, who passed away in 2015 and had been a large figure in my life, I grew up with her, did not come through really in the appointment. I asked about her at the end because I had definitely expected her to be there. And the medium told me that she was present, but she was staying to the back and telling her that there were other people that I needed to hear from more. And that was surprising because my grandmother was a very assertive woman in life. So for her to choose to take a back seat to others seemed highly unusual. But I mention that because for me it spoke to their higher level of consciousness when they're on the other side. Some of the personality traits, or maybe even you could call them personality flaws, that people have on this side are not present on the other side anymore. And so you might experience some different interactions with them than you would have expected. And the second thing that I want to mention is that a spirit came through that I didn't recognize. And the medium tried really hard to explain to me, or give me rather, evidence for me to connect the dots to figure out who that person was, and I never successfully did. I have a suspicion, but I've never been able to confirm it. And if my suspicion's correct, it's a spirit of somebody that I never even met in this life. I know him indirectly, and he came through in my appointment. And the reason that I mention that is because I firmly believe that the spirits want to talk to us as much as we want to talk to them. And in some cases, their opportunity to speak to us gives them their own kind of closure. I believe that my grandfather appreciated the opportunity to come through and talk to me in what I would call his true form on the other side, and not with any of the baggage that he carried in this life. And I've heard other parents talk about experiences that they've had at mediumship appointments with adult children or even high school age children who express their own unresolved feelings or messages that they're happy to get the opportunity to tell their parents even after death. And I'm not implying that you should go see a medium for the sole purpose of giving your deceased relatives the opportunity to absolve themselves of any unresolved issues. I'm simply pointing out that I think it's a mutually beneficial experience, not only for the living, but also for the dead. I've since had other mediumship appointments, and all of them have done nothing but further confirm for me the truth that we really can communicate with our deceased loved ones and spirits on the other side. But I do want to say that, like any profession, there are some mediums who are experts, some mediums who are novices, and some mediums who are in between. And the number one thing is that you should do your research and make sure you know as much as you can about the medium that you're hiring, to have clear expectations when you're going into it. And there's information out there that you can read if you're wholly uninitiated, so that you can have some expectations and some do's and don'ts for when you go to your mediumship appointment. The Forever Family Foundation has a PDF that you can download with some tips, and so I'm not going to go over all of those here, but I'll make sure to link that down below in the show notes. And I also want to mention the organization Helping Parents Heal. I don't have a lot of personal experience with them as far as mediumship goes, but they do offer through Facebook private group meetings that happen with mediums that they bring on for free, and it gives a lot of parents a chance, I guess, to dip their toe in. Also a chance for your child to come through if they've really been wanting to and haven't had an opportunity yet. And every parent I've talked to so far has been amazed and appreciative of the experience that they have with the medium. Helping Parents Heal also has their own vetting process, so to speak, and a lot of resources for people who are interested in contacting a medium. They too advocate for making sure that it's somebody qualified and legitimate. And since they're a free organization, I really encourage you to check them out if mediumship appointments are something that you've been interested in or considering and want a low commitment, easy way to find out more, even to speak personally with other parents who've had mediumship appointments. But know too that real mediums aren't just limited to the certified directories on Forever Family Foundation and Helping Parents Heal. Like I said, the medium I used was not from either one of those, and she was amazing. I'd say the number one thing when you're picking a medium is to trust your intuition. And if you don't know what your intuition is, then it's that gut feeling when you see somebody's picture or read their bio or look around on their website, where you just feel like you like this. It has a good feeling, a good gut reaction. That's your intuition. Feel free to follow that. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Selfish Griever podcast. I hope you enjoyed my experience with mediums, and I made sure to leave all the links below. This Friday, I have a special episode coming out. It's my first talk with a grieving dad, and he shares too about some of his mediumship experiences. So I hope you come back and listen to that one and enjoy it as much as I enjoyed getting to talk to him. If you have a minute, please leave a rating and review for the show. It really helps other listeners like you find us and connect with more grieving parents seeking spiritual support. Thank you, and we'll talk soon.